All right. So, just hang on a sec, just while I think to start with, Louis, I will ask you a question. So the work, you don't need.
Oh, okay.
So the work you presented was very much focused on indicators during the COVID pandemic. So do you have any plans to extend this work to perhaps different measures and looking at variation within GP practices, but that aren't focused specifically on COVID?
Yes, so as I alluded to, the framework is very much extendable to whatever measures we want to apply, whether it be practice level indicators or patient level indicators. So yes, we do. We don't have any solid plans, but that's the kind of work that we want to be doing, particularly thinking in the non-COVID basis.
Great. Tina, I have a question. There's a question for you. They said it was interesting to see that the guidelines did not have any effect on clinical practice. Do you have any thoughts on why this might be, and how can we improve implementation of guidelines? Perhaps that's a lot to answer, but if you have any thoughts on that, it would be great.
Yeah, I'll try. With the guidelines, I think they're not mandated. It's just sort of a guidance document on, in addition to a lot of things about how the diagnosis should be carried out, what are the different nutritional interventions required in these patients. I think there is a factor about how much of it is being consumed by primary healthcare practitioners, secondary and tertiary practitioners. So that is there. I think a lot of it comes down to training as well of the healthcare and clinicians, where they sort of are aware of the fact that these new guidelines have been introduced. So I think that is one of the things. And I also believe that with specific cancers, like so for instance, pancreatic cancers, with the GPs seeing a lot of different cancers, and I think somehow the sort of specific treatments are mainly focused with tertiary healthcare centers, and there might be a lot of patients with unresectable cancers who might not necessarily avail treatments at tertiary healthcare centers and will be going on to primary healthcare centers and secondary centers, and that could also be one of the reasons. That's what I think could be or could not be entirely true.
Yes, because there was a question in there, I can't seem to find it now, but it was about that, whether you had run into issues with people receiving care, both in primary and secondary care, in that division. So I think that answers that. Colin, I want to ask a question of you. Can you talk a little bit about the learning curve with the process of developing this video? Like, how much time would it take if somebody was interested in doing this?
So it depends which route you go. So if you sort of do PowerPoint, then you could make it very, very simple. Just do a presentation as everyone has done here. That would still be incredibly valuable resource for people that we would appreciate, and that's very sort of less time dependent. I may be slightly over-engineered mine. And it's hard to give an exact time because I sort of no one really requested these videos either, so I did a bit of them on my own time. But I'd say as you could create something in a couple of hours. I maybe spent like, I don't know, 8-ish hours or so getting the second video. If you do use something like Animaker, then I found that actually took way more time, just because I didn't even scratch the surface of the things that you can do with it, and it's quite easy to get distracted by the shiny things and be like, ooh, I'll do this instead.
Well, I think we know who to go to if we have questions about it.
Absolutely, yeah, please do contact.
Studi and Sophie, I have a question for you now. What is your advice for somebody going down this route, developing measures like this? And is there any part of the process in particular that you found particularly most useful that you would say this is absolutely something you have to do or not do, perhaps?
I would say definitely the most valuable part of our work was having the advice of the advisory group. And as Stuti mentioned, the fact that we had patient and public involvement meant that we could also find out what's really valuable for patients or their family who are going through the end-of-life care pathway, which is a really difficult pathway in time. And when you're looking at quality of care, it's really important to encompass what is important to patients as well as from the clinical perspective as well.
Yeah, and one more thing to add on the data side. When we were sort of doing homework after having identified the principles of end-of-life care, of like how we can identify these in GP records, there was so many SNOMED codes that we found that was so interesting that had to do with end-of-life care. And I mean, we ended up using the 2 measures that we did because it was only feasible to continue with those because they had enough codes that were used enough, but there were so many others which had some really interesting information, like cultural views, for example, of somebody in their end-of-life stage, which would be very interesting to look into, but that code just wasn't being used. It existed, but it wasn't being used. So it's very exciting when you first start looking at it, but then the scope of what you can do shrinks. So that's sort of my word of warning that gap will exist, but definitely worth looking into anyway.
I definitely agree that dealing with coding and SNOMED codes in particular can be a bit of a minefield, and that's why it's important to really do it well and get good advice from people who know what they're doing. So good work. In the interest of the time, I think we'll take a break now. We are coming back, so we're heading out for coffee, and everyone should come back at 3:30 for our next session. So thank you all to the speakers. Thank you.